This is a pretty well-known map depicting the situation on July the 6th about 10:30 a.m. First we see Clenau in the 6th Corps has swept through Aspern, ejected Boudet, is essentially marching unopposed towards the bridges. Then we see Collervat just to the north with his 3rd Corps, having moved through Brightonley, and is similarly unopposed, moving in on the French left. Liechtenstein with the Grenadiers and heavy cavalry is heavily engaged right there on the French left. Opposite him is Messina, who is completely occupied, having retaken Otterclaw in the wake of the repulse of the Saxons and Bernadotte. He's supported by Nansouty there and his heavy cavalry. And all the way on the opposite side, we see the 3rd Corps pushing hard against the Austrian 4th Corps, and the French are supported by a mass of 3rd Corps and Reserve cavalry on the far right. Looking west, mostly west on the Marchfeld, the end of the 10:20 turn. It's about 3.5 hours of battle. The action is mainly developing on the flanks. The east side, the French right, the Austrian left, the far end, the west side, the French left, the Austrian right. Why don't we go in for a closer look and see how it compares to that historical situation. The French are attacking on the far right here, so we'll look at it from their perspective. This is Montbrun's cavalry, and he has been killed. One of Napoleon's aides is on his way to take over the division. But there's been some spirited fighting over on this side between the 6th Corps and the advance guard light cavalry. No one's gained a real advantage. The advance guard for the Austrians are here. They've begun to abandon this position to try to swing around and hold up the main position. Now they see the no infantry is coming up this way. Shifting around to the main part of the attack here. 2 French divisions, Morand and Friant, have been smashing their way up the hillside here. They've made decent progress, but it's not really progress in strength. There's still a fairly recognizable line of Austrians there defending, as well as some cavalry ready to pounce. Now on paper, the French have a very clear superiority. Numbers, better morale, better combat power. Even the rate of morale checks is in their favor. The Austrians checking on odd number and increment losses, and the French on even. But this is what I love about games. It's not about the numbers. It's about fate. For some inexplicable reason, the French have been routinely rolling numbers in the teens and the low 20s for their morale checks and the rally checks, so they have been failing, retreating, and routing at a really high rate. The Austrians, on the other hand, have been rolling a tremendous number of high 50s, low 60s for their morale checks. So instead of just being swept away as they should by the numbers, they've been holding fast, fighting far longer than really it would seem they should. So for reasons I can't even begin to explain, the game is showing me it ain't the maths, it's the man. That said, the numbers are beginning to show. Just the French strength is grinding down the Austrians. They are beginning to rout. They are on a morale level here, Rosenberg's 4th Corps. So it's only a matter of time. So that's historic at least. We have another French division preparing to try to take advantage of some of the weakness, the fracturing here. Going to go across that ford right there. But they're having a tough time. There's some artillery and some decent Austrian infantry, and they're starting to disorder and fall back themselves. We'll kind of continue our journey here. The rest of the Third Corps, excuse me. That's Gudin's division, and he is opposite the town of Markgraf Neusiedl here. He's kind of waiting his turn. A nice artillery duel is going on. He's grinding up the forces at distance, but there's no reason to go too hard too soon. That'll just cause casualties. He's going to wait for a little bit of this flank to roll up before charging across that stream there. And that really is the plan for the entire French center. Why take on all those casualties going straight across that stream? When we have an exposed flank, really two, we'll let them do the bulk of the work, start to push the Austrians back, make them vulnerable, see if they can commit some forces to try to hold back those flank attacks, and then take advantage of any weakness that presents itself. There's just no reason to go up against that artillery on those heights, take all those casualties for no clear benefit. But if the center is watching and waiting, not so on the left, on the far west side of the field. This is what the Saxons should look like, the Ninth Corps. Routed, retreating. That is Marshal Bernadotte. I'm not even sure he's supposed to be set up in this scenario. Couldn't tell if he was supposed to have already been relieved, but he has been thrown back, trying to rally. And the Ninth Corps is really no longer presenting much of a presence in the defense. So it took a while, but that actually finally presented an actual jeopardy to the French that needed to be countered. The Austrians had moved hard with their reserve grenadiers and cuirassiers, and that caused the French to have to respond. They committed Nansouty's heavy cavalry and a massive charge, which swept away much of the Austrian advance there. They were able to move up their 2nd Grenadier Division, and now taking position across from the Bavarians, who moved up to try to plug that gap. But still, with the retreat of the Ninth Corps, there's a pretty sizable hole right here. Kind of historical. Except Marshal Massena's 4th Corps is nowhere to be seen in trying to counter that. So where is the 4th Corps? What are they up to? I think it's a little odd the way this plays out at the very beginning of the scenario. The 4th Corps is in no way engaged. On the first turn, you simply turn them south and west and march straight ahead to meet the oncoming Austrians. So there's no disengagement of the 4th Corps, no pivot, just straight on, go get them. And that kind of stymies the Austrians pretty quickly. So we have Molitor's division here in Brightonley. They haven't moved an inch in 4 hours, 3 hours, whatever it's been. The 3rd Corps of the Austrians has tried to make some headway, but really they haven't been able to dislodge anyone at all. And there's the Marshal right there. It's interesting. I think I've learned what his limitation is. What's the best thing the Marshal can do? Well, rally troops to start to fall back. Because they move at 10 hexes. He only moves at 7. He can't keep up. So it's hard to get Massena, his morale benefit, in play for any units that rout. But if those divisions have stymied the Austrians, the Austrian 3rd Corps anyway, what's going on to the south? Yeah, we're not seeing a lot of Austrians here. What happened to everybody? Well, the 6th Corps has been just utterly smashed. Again, the French 4th Corps is able to pivot, meet them head on. 2 full divisions, including Boudet's division that was in Aspern, and the Sixth Corps just can't make any progress. It's currently on a morale level. Quite a number of them have been routed, and they're trying to reform a new line further to the west. Essentially, they're retreating. So there was no real drive to the bridges here. They were stopped cold and more or less shattered. And we're not Francophiles, so let's take a look and see what the Austrians are feeling like now. Sixth Corps here, definitely in some trouble. A whole lot of routed units. They're on a morale level. They barely are able to form a secondary line there as they're waiting for their guys to retreat. But the French are in force, and likely are going to chase them all the way back. Maybe even as far back as Cogran. Now, getting to the Third Corps, they seem to have a powerful gun line here, yes. But actually, their infantry has taken some pretty horrible casualties. And they're in the process of trying to retreat as well. Basically, the attack on the right has failed at this point. Really not clear what they're going to do next, other than maybe to try to defend. Maybe spread out the Fourth Corps. We'll see. But they never did manage to get into Brightonley. I think they occupied one hex before being ejected. It took a while, but the 2nd Grenadiers have finally marched into place. But while strong, they're still pretty lonely. Now the rest of the reserve probably can rally here. A lot of spent cavalry, whole lot of damaged grenadiers there. I don't know if they can make another attack here. The best thing is that the French have a giant hole there. This is Dupat's division here of the 9th Corps. It's really all that's left. So the French will be looking to do something, and that means the Austrians really need to try to force their hand. They need to make some kind of a show to make the French respond. And obviously that didn't work so well before. They got swept away by the French heavy cavalry. But, hey, got to do something. So we make our way. We actually see a pretty big hole right there, held by some reserve cavalry in skirmish order, before we get to Bellegarde's 1st Corps around Otterclaw. There's a pretty sizable French force opposite them. It's really pretty huge. It's all of Eugene's army, really, including Marmont's 11th Corps. And all we have is kind of the thin line of the 1st Corps. And that's been the question for a couple of hours now. Like, what to do? Do you try to assault? I mean, my God, there's so much French artillery, cavalry. Or do we just hold tight? I think this is part of the gambit that the Austrians are going to have to try to take here. They can't hold back any longer, now that their far right has collapsed, but more or less. I think the 1st Corps is going to have to advance and try to attack, rather than just sit there and wait. The Austrian center is kind of idle, just like the French. Got their artillery in place, taking shots as they can, but there's really no reason to attack out of those strong defensive positions. So we'll get to the far left, see what's going on there. And this is the beginning of the trouble. A whole lot of routed units in the 4th Corps here. Some in the process of retreating, a few have rallied. But they're already on a morale level, which makes it much harder to rally and to hold ground. So starting here around the area of Markgraf-Neuchâtel, there's basically 2 fords, 2 crossing points. One directly opposite the town, one a little to the west. The French are just starting to pressure those as they see essentially the smoke starting to creep up with the Marshal's advance on the far east of the line. And there's just not much to oppose the French there. All these battalions have been taking casualties from artillery. A number have already retreated and routed away. So this could be a real danger point. if this 3rd Division is able to punch through, it could risk the entire left of the line. But they are holding on. Notice there's a couple of disordered French battalions that have been repulsed and retreated back across the ford there. But they are pretty dangerously exposed here. There's nothing there. Since we're coming up on the next turn, French will have the first move, and they can very well flank that infantry and artillery. So see, we've fallen back a bit up the hill, abandoned several of the Feldlager locations, but it's been a grudging retreat. Yeah, there have been plenty of losses, plenty of retreats and routes, but quite a few, especially these Landwehr, have just been holding on. But for how much longer? Can they exact enough of a toll to be able to retreat? I don't know. Can these dragoons get enough of a clear shot to maybe drive back some French infantry? There just isn't any reinforcement that can come in to shore up this line. Best thing we have is the advance guard here. And they're putting a hurt on the French, but there's just not enough of them to stem the tide. There are a few more regiments here. They're going to circle around now that they have the kind of the knowledge there's nothing coming on the far left to threaten them. All the infantry is coming off right here, so it looks inevitable that the flank will collapse. There's been no sign of Archduke John, so we can't count on him to provide any real relief. It's going to be a delaying action, exacting as much of a price as possible. That will probably be the best the Austrians can do, certainly on this side of the field, if not just in the battle in general. You know, it's clear that the events on the west side of the field haven't been very historic, or historical, I should say. But, you know, they've been playing out in a way that seems reasonable, if not just accelerated in time. Kind of don't know what to do with the Austrians at this point over there, with their attack failing so miserably. Kind of makes the game outcome more than inevitable. But I'd say my only regret at this point is that there is no specific rule allowing me to relieve Marshal Bernadotte and kick him off the field. I'd really like to do that, especially given how far the Saxons have retreated and failed at this point. Otherwise, we'll keep going, pick this up in a few more hours, and see if the Austrians can hold on.